is almost non-existent. So it all depends on whether you get it right or not.
The quest to improve human life pushes the frontiers of technology and risk.
I've had to mortgage my whole life, but I think it's worth it.
And is there a limit to how far we can go? Human Body Shop on innovation.
Join us tonight at 9 here on OPB. Through partnerships with local schools and universities, OPB provides workshops for teachers on how to best use media in the classroom.
Teaching history, I'm discovering, is pretty challenging. Sometimes it's hard to sell with students. Video on demand is an internet accessible collection of videos made available to teachers. Say you're looking for information on JFK. Type in JFK, it'll pop up with a number of possible links and you can download it and show it in your classroom. If the students are engaged, that's really what I want in my teaching.
OPB and the Northwest Film Center invite you to enjoy the Portland International Film Festival featuring nearly 100 films from over 30 countries, February 13th through the 28th. For more information, call 503-228-PIFF or check the link at opb.org.
Next time on Frontline, the client.
I trusted one of the largest accounting firms in the world.
The pitch.
They told me this was a bulletproof deal.
The firm.
The penalties paled in comparison to the revenues that would be generated by this tax shelter.
The payoff.
They can create these products for thousands of dollars and sell them for millions.
The problem.
Corporations saved billions in taxes, and the rest of us are picking up the tab for it.
Tax me if you can. Watch Frontline.
Thursday night at 9 here on OPB.
This is OPB.
Funding for local broadcast of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by viewers like you and by the following. Kolish Hartwell, a patent, trademark, copyright law firm celebrating its 50th year serving Oregon technology companies and creative individuals.
Good evening, I'm Jim Lara. On the NewsHour tonight, our summary of the news. Then a look at today's agreement to create the largest wireless phone company in the U.S. Some perspective on the latest military and political developments in Iraq. A report from Arizona on how immigrants feel about immigration reform. Details of a new study on a possible connection between antibiotics and breast cancer. And a Campaign Times report from Wisconsin on the Democratic primary.
Major funding for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by...
Can you paint something beautiful with sunflowers? Can you drive forever on corn? ADM has found if you ask the right questions, nature will answer. By finding natural alternatives for many of the things we use every day, we're working to make the world less harmful to people and more friendly to the environment. ADM. The nature of what's to come.
And by the SBC companies, 125 years of sweat, of building networks, of getting the job done. After 125 years, we are just getting started. SBC, going beyond the call.
And by CIT.
This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
The polls have just closed in the Democratic presidential primary in Wisconsin, and it's too close to call. John Kerry had been far ahead in pre-election surveys, but based on exit polls, John Edwards appears to be running neck and neck with Kerry. Howard Dean is a distant third. Both men have vowed to stay in the race even if they lose. Kerry campaigned in Milwaukee today and aimed new criticism at President Bush. He said the president neglected firefighters, police, and other emergency workers after 9/11.
I'm tired of these politicians who show up when the bagpipes are wailing and the flags are at half-staff, and they talk about heroes in America. And then they go back to Washington, and when the flags are at full staff again, the bagpipes have stopped playing, they forget And there is no way that we should forget.
President Bush also talked about the war on terror today. He visited Fort Polk, Louisiana, and told a military audience the fight against terror would go on.
My resolve is the same today as it was on the morning of September the 12th, 2001. My resolve is the same as it was on the day when I walked in the rubble of the Twin Towers. I will not relent until this threat to America is removed.
Mr. Bush also met with National Guard members getting ready to go to Iraq. We'll have more on this day's presidential campaigning later in the program. In Iraq, another U.S. soldier died in a roadside bombing last night. And on the political front, there was more criticism of a U.S. plan to choose an interim government through regional caucuses. Several members of the Iraqi Governing Council said they would likely reject it. We'll have more on Iraq later in the program. A federal prosecutor in Detroit has sued Attorney General Ashcroft over the first major terrorism case after 9/11. The lawsuit says the Justice Department interfered with a case against a terror cell in Detroit. It also claims officials retaliated against the prosecutor for talking to a Senate committee. The Justice Department had no comment on the case today. The government of Haiti called today for outside help against a rebellion. The rebels now control most roads in and out of northern Haiti, and late today they seized a key city in the center of the country, about 70 miles north of the capital, Port-au-Prince. Today the premier said a coup was underway. He said the outside world must prove it wants peace in Haiti. But in Washington, Secretary of State Powell all but ruled out sending a military force.
There is, frankly, no enthusiasm right now for sending in military or police forces to put down the violence that we are seeing. What we want to do right now is find a political solution, and then there are willing nations that would come forward with police presence to implement the political agreement that the sides come to.
In Paris, the French foreign minister said his country was considering whether to send peacekeepers. Haiti is a former French colony. Two groups opposed to gay marriage went to court in San Francisco today. They want to block the city from issuing any more marriage licenses to same-sex couples. One of the groups also wants to invalidate more than 2,000 marriages already performed. The office of Mayor Gavin Newsom said the city would keep issuing licenses until there's a ruling. The Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Los Angeles reported today on 7 decades of sexual abuse claims. The records show that since 1930, more than 650 people have made such claims. Some 240 priests, deacons, and others were allegedly involved. Los Angeles Cardinal Roger Mahoney said he hopes the report helps clear the air.
Over the years, this was kept hush-hush, and we have found that that helps no one. Doesn't help the church, it certainly doesn't help the victim, it doesn't help all of us avoid the problem. So we are trying to be as open and transparent as we can about what we know.
The Los Angeles Archdiocese is the nation's largest. It's facing a flood of civil suits over abuse claims. And in Phoenix, Arizona today, Bishop Thomas O'Brien was convicted of leaving the scene after killing a pedestrian with his car. He stepped down after he was charged last June. He could get nearly 4 years in prison. Singular Wireless won the battle to buy AT&T Wireless today for nearly $41 billion. The Singular bid topped Britain's Vodafone Group. The merger would create the nation's largest cellular phone company. It's subject to federal approval. We'll have more on this story right after the news summary. The Walt Disney Company has rejected a takeover bid by Comcast. Disney's board voted late Monday to decline the offer, initially valued at $54 billion. Disney did say it might reconsider if Comcast offers more money. Manufacturing in the United States had strong growth last month. The Federal Reserve reported today that industrial production was up 0.8% in January. That was the largest increase since November. On Wall Street today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 87 points to close above 10,714. The NASDAQ rose more than 26 points to close at 2080. And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to the big wireless deal, an Iraq update, immigration reform, antibiotics and cancer, and the Wisconsin primary. Ray Suarez has the wireless story.
The merger between Cingular, the nation's #2 cell phone provider, and #3 provider AT&T Wireless could reshape the fiercely competitive cell phone market. We should say that Cingular is owned by NewsHour underwriter SBC. The new company will go by the name Cingular, have about 46 million customers in the U.S., and have a network that covers 49 states. Here to discuss the merger and its potential impact on consumers in the industry is Charles Golvin, a principal analyst covering the wireless industry at Forrester Research, an independent technology consulting company. So Charles Golvin, multiple companies were in the hunt for AT&T. How did Cingular win out?
Well, ultimately, Cingular won out because they offered the most money. I believe that there was also some sleight of hand in trying to turn the time difference between the U.S. and the U.K., where Vodafone is based, to their advantage, and they were able to place a last-minute bid that topped the top dollar that Vodafone had offered.
Why was AT&T Wireless such an attractive takeover target to these two companies?
Well, AT&T Wireless was the only independent with the largest market share, not someone with an alliance with an existing wireline provider like Cingular and Verizon Wireless. And ultimately, AT&T decided that they could get the most value from their longstanding investment by selling the company today. And absent the opportunity to grow organically just by adding more subscribers through their daily efforts, this was really the greatest opportunity that any of these carriers had to really jump market share and extract a bigger piece of the pie.
Well, if you're a customer with either, will you find, if the merger goes ahead, that the two mesh easily? Do they use similar systems, similar towers, similar networks, similar hardware?
They do operate the same kinds of networks. Actually, both companies operate two different technologies today, and they're migrating from the old to the new, but in both cases it's the same. I think the main thing that customers of Cingular and AT&T Wireless are going to experience as the primary benefit is that the overall call quality and service quality is going to improve fairly significantly. That's because the two companies have different towers in the same places by and large, and now customers from both companies can share all the wireless spectrum that they own, so it can be more evenly divided among a more even base of customers, and more spectrum is available. More spectrum means more call capability, and so that means fewer dropped calls, better chance that your calls go through and stay on.
Should consumers, customers either with other wireless companies or with the two involved in the merger, worry about a smaller number of companies creating less incentive for price competition and less incentive for technical innovation?
Well, on price competition, I don't think so. We still have 5 national wireless carriers today, and they are all quite aggressive in trying to win customers. In fact, today, more and more of the customers that they're after are existing wireless subscribers with their competitors, and they're very aggressive in trying to win those over. So price competition, I think, is something that we're going to continue to see just because there are a lot of players out there. But on the point of innovation, I think that because these two large players, Verizon and Cingular, have parent companies who are regional Bell operating companies who own the fixed lines into most consumers' homes, and the pain that those companies feel today, more than anything else, is the loss of those lines and their core business. I think that the innovation that we're going to see from these two larger providers is really going to be focused on applications, services that give consumers an incentive to buy both wireless and wireline services from the same provider, from Cingular and SBC if you live in California or Texas, from Cingular and Bell South if you live in the Southeast, from Verizon and Verizon Wireless if you're in the Northeast. And as a result, we're not going to see the same focus on pure wireless innovation and new wireless services that we would have seen from a company like AT&T Wireless, which was a standalone wireless company and no fixed line investments that they had to protect.
So we're not seeing, for example, large numbers of consumers deciding to do without a hardwire phone all together and just having their cell phone be their phone?
Well, today we have about 4% of U.S. Households tell us that they have a wireless phone and no fixed line phone. So it's not a gigantic number today. It is growing rapidly, but these customers who are cutting the cord, if you will, are primarily doing so for cost savings reasons. They are not the customers who spend the most with wireless companies. But in the future, we're going to see more and more young people who simply never get a landline phone, and that is really the greater threat to these fixed line operators, is this young professionals who move into the workforce and already have a wireless phone that is the number where everybody knows how to reach them, and simply have little motivation to actually go to their fixed line provider and get a home line installed.
Well, before this merger becomes an accomplished fact, it has to clear regulatory hurdles. Should they be worried when number 2 and number 3 merge to create a new number 1 that it just might not get past the regulators?
I don't think that the regulatory hurdles are going to be all that significant in this case. Again, we do have other national wireless providers like Nextel and Sprint PCS and T-Mobile, so it would be much more of a concern if number 2 and number 3 got together and that limited the number of choices to, say, 2 or 3. But in this case, with 5 competitors, I don't think that that will be a significant concern. And I don't think that the regulatory concerns about spectrum ownership, which have inhibited mergers in the past, are going to be an issue at all, because those barriers have been removed by the FCC by a previous ruling.
And quickly, what about the other companies in this business? Do they start looking for merger or acquisition targets now as well?
Well, one of the big challenges with mergers in the wireless space is that U.S. carriers use multiple technologies, and there isn't any synergy in bringing 2 companies together if their basic technologies are not the same. Now, the smaller carriers that are out there today, T-Mobile, Nextel, and Sprint, all use different technologies, so none of them can actually get together in a very synergistic way and create a competitor which comes close to the numbers that Singular and Verizon have. I think we will see over the next several years, although not immediately, a number of other mergers and acquisitions. Initially, these will be big buying small, so small regional carriers being swallowed up. But I do believe that in the future we will see another large acquisition that will reduce the number of national carriers down to 4 or even possibly 3.
Charles Golvin, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now an update on Iraq. Kwame Holman begins.
A week of violence has left 130 people dead. The roadside bomb that killed an American soldier today was the 3rd such attack in 24 hours. Over the weekend and last week, Iraqis were the victims in coordinated attacks against police and civil defense targets. A week ago, a massive truck bomb exploded outside a police station in central Iraq, killing dozens of Iraqi recruits. A day later, nearly 50 Iraqis were killed in an attack on a Baghdad army recruiting center. On Thursday, in Fallujah, west of Baghdad, Iraqi insurgents attacked a convoy carrying the top U.S. military official in Iraq. General John Abizaid was not hurt. The most brazen and sophisticated assault was a daylight raid Saturday in Fallujah. About 24 guerrillas stormed a police station and security compound, freeing some 75 prisoners. 25 people were killed, including 4 attackers.
They opened fire against us indiscriminately. We hid as the RPGs and grenades were fired against us.
As the casualties mount, the date when the U.S. is to hand over sovereignty to the Iraqis, June 30th, looms. The Bush administration originally wanted to hold a series of caucuses to start the selection process for a new Iraqi government. The U.S.-appointed Iraq Governing Council went along with that idea at first. But the caucus plan got a thumbs down from Iraq's leading Shiite cleric, who rarely appears in public. He called for direct elections instead. The U.S. asserted that wasn't practical so soon and asked the United Nations to help broker a new arrangement. UN envoy Lakhdar Brahimi met with the governing council and Shiite clerics last week. He, too, said he doubted there was adequate time to set up elections before the handover date.
We have agreed that the timing, should not be prisoner to any deadlines, that we need to organize elections as early as possible, but not earlier than possible.
Brahimi is expected to submit his recommendations to the UN Secretary General as early as this week. But there is more opposition to the Bush administration's caucus plan. The Washington Post reported today that half the members of the Iraq Governing Council no longer support the idea. In Washington today, Secretary of State Colin Powell acknowledged that the disagreement over when and how to transfer power remains unresolved.
The debates goes around the issue of a caucus. Is the caucus still the best way to do it, or can the caucus process be refined or modified in some way, or is there some other procedure that might be used to reflect the will of the Iraqi people as we move forward? And so we're waiting to get the report from the Secretary General before any decisions are made. And I think the Governing Council is also waiting to hear the report of Ambassador Brahimi. What we're talking about is an interim government to whom sovereignty will be transferred until such time as you can have a full constitution in place and that you can have a full election, which nobody believes is possible by June. But at some point in the future, whether it's the end of this year or sometime next year, remains to be determined.
Secretary Powell said he still had an open mind on the issue.
Margaret Warner has more.
What do the latest developments say about Iraq's security situation and the prospects for a political transition by the U.S. declared deadline of July 1st? For that, we're joined by Adi Dawisha, a professor of political science at Miami University of Ohio. Born in Iraq, he's now an American citizen. Retired Army Colonel W. Patrick Lang, a former Middle East intelligence analyst at the Defense Intelligence Agency. And Nancy Soderberg, Vice President of the International Crisis Group, a nonprofit group promoting conflict resolution. She held senior positions on the National Security Council and the U.S. delegation to the UN during the Clinton administration. Welcome to you all. Pat Lang, last week the UN sends a team in to assess the feasibility of elections, quick elections. And that same week, we see some of the bloodiest, particularly Iraqi-on-Iraqi violence we've seen. Coincidence?
No, not at all. I mean, the insurgents, I think, have a very clear idea of the fact that they want to impede this whole process as much as they possibly can. And so, as was reflected in the letter that was captured at the border by someone who is thought to have been Mr. Zarqawi, they clearly have the idea.
An
Al-Qaeda-connected Islamic zealot terrorist. They have the idea that they want to stop this process before it goes too far. And since insurgent wars are largely about control of the population, either by positive means or through causing fear, the idea that they would attack other Iraqis in this way and seek to keep people from joining the police is not surprising.
And you're talking now about mostly Sunni insurgents?
At the present time, the insurgents all appear to be largely Sunnis. The Shia have been, in the southern part of the country, have been quite quiescent up to this point. I have the impression that they're waiting to see what they're going to get out of the eventual constitutional setup in the country, and so they're not too eager to make trouble right now.
Professor Dawisha, do you agree with that assessment so far, and who do you think's behind this violence and why?
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. I think that the Shiite population does not differ very much from the Sunni population in Iraq in actually wanting to see the Americans leave Iraq at some point. The difference is that the Shiites don't want them to leave Iraq now, because they know that if the Americans were to leave tomorrow, or even if they were to leave next month, it is the Sunni insurgents, the remnants of the old Saddam regime, members of the Ba'ath Party, whoever is perpetrating this violence against the Iraqis themselves, the chances are it's they who are going to be able to take over the reins of power, something which the Shiites don't want to see. So that while the Shiites certainly don't want to see an occupation that goes on forever, they also realize that this is not the time for the Americans to leave.
But I guess what I should have asked you more directly is, do you think this is mostly the work of Sunni insurgents, or do you see a big hand by Al-Qaeda, by outside foreign fighters, terrorists?
It's not very clear as to who is perpetrating this. It's very interesting, for example, in the latest attack in Fallujah, initially we were told that the insurgents were Iranians. They were shouting Allahu Akbar in a non-Iraqi accent, that they wanted to free 4 Iranians. And then literally the day after, both the police headquarters in Fallujah as well as the American military headquarters denied all that and said no, the people who carried out the attacks were Iraqis. It's a very confusing situation, but the thing that you get out of that is some kind of cooperation between the Ba'athists, the old Saddam people, as well as maybe some foreign fighters who are basically infiltrating Iraq regularly and have been doing so for the last 4 or 5 months.
Okay, I want to get to Nancy Soderberg, but first, Pat Lang, just clarify one thing for us. We see fewer Americans getting killed. Now, is that because American troops have basically pulled back and are trying to leave it to the Iraqis?
Well, it seems, in fact, that we have some sort of policy of relative disengagement from what's going on in the towns. The officer who is the operations officer for the Coalition Provisional Authority said yesterday that he was quite pleased with the result in Fallujah on Saturday because the Iraqis had stood up and fought for themselves. I would have thought that although that was a desirable thing, in fact, you wouldn't want to see them take so many losses. And I don't understand why there wasn't some air support provided to these policemen.
Nancy Soderberg, what's your assessment of the impact that this violence has on the prospects for a political transition?
Well, ironically, the perpetrators of this, and I think it's remnants of the Saddam regime, plus a growing al-Qaeda presence, the irony is that the more they attack to try and get the U.S. out of Iraq, the longer the U.S. is going to have to stay in Iraq, because we can't leave as long as this violence is going on. You can't hold elections and caucuses as long as this violence is. And so what they are doing by these constant attacks on U.S. and increasingly on the Iraqi people is prolonging the U.S. occupation.
But the people you talk to, for instance, at the UN, do they think that if the security situation is not stable, you could still have a political transition? In other words, as Paul Bremer, the head of the Provisional Authority, suggested this weekend, that in fact Americans could keep control of the security piece somehow and you could still have a political transition?
Well, you can have some political violence, but not the chaos that you have right now. Until they get the security right, the political process is going to be somewhat stymied. The UN Secretary General is deeply angry at himself for having let the best and the brightest of the UN, a team led by Sergio de Mello, who was killed in the bombing on August 19th. They knew then that the political situation was wrong, but let them go anyway. They will not do that again. So until the security situation is settled, you will not have the UN go in any great numbers. And that presents a problem for the U.S. because they now need the UN in order to have a legitimate transition. No process that the U.S. puts forward will be seen as legitimate. So they need the UN in there. And that means that you've got U.S. troops there in major numbers for the foreseeable future.
Professor DeWish, I want to ask you about something that Paul Bremer did say, I think it was Sunday or Monday after these attacks, and particularly the one in Fallujah. He said, I think it's quite clear that the Iraqi security forces, brave as they are not going to be ready by July 1. So there will have to be an international presence here after the sovereign government comes to power, etc. Would you agree with that? That just on the security front, however many that have been trained by American forces, they're really not up to defeating these insurgents yet?
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. There was a great haste in trying to recruit police and other security forces, and I can understand that because we really wanted to give the occupation an Iraqi face, and so we kind of tended to hasten this recruitment process. We're giving them 2 to 3 weeks training. Therefore, a bunch of them were poorly trained. Listen, last July, we had about 20,000 security forces, police and other security. Now we have about 175,000. You can see the explosion in numbers. Well, there's no way that these people have been trained really fully for this for the challenges that they were going to face. Plus, when you do it so hastily, you're actually encouraging remnants of the Saddam's regime to get into the police force and act as inside informers. I mean, the fifth columns in the police at the moment are responsible for many of these atrocities. Obviously, many of the attacks knew exactly where the prisoners were, what time the guards were changing. There was a lot of information coming to them from the inside, and all this was a result of the haste by which we expanded the police force. So I don't think there's any way that we can say these people are going to be able to keep the peace and stop the challenges that are going to be perpetrated against them and against the people of Iraq.
And in the meantime, Pat Lang, would you agree with the assessments that the insurgents have become more sophisticated and bolder?
There appear to me to be two groups there. One are a group of people who are, if you call them Ba'athists or Iraqi nationalists or somebody, are intent upon excluding us from the countryside and shooting at our logistical convoys, things like that. Then you have these people from overseas, outside the country, who are basically Sunni zealots, who appear to be really hard case types and are well organized, and they're going to repeatedly come in and try to attack places in the daylight, I think, in spite of what their losses are likely to be. So, and they use anti-aircraft missiles and all kinds of fire support. They're tough people, and they're going to need help for a long time.
All right, briefly to all three of you, and I'll start with you, Nancy Soderberg. As we've said, Mr. Brahimi's returning to the UN later this week. Kofi Annan said today he hoped to have the recommendation ready by the end of the week. Given that he has said publicly, Brahimi has said, on the one hand, he seems to agree with the Shiites that elections are the way to go, but on the other hand, he seems to agree with the Americans that quick elections are not possible. What are at least his options?
Well, I think what will happen is he'll provide various options to the U.S. and the UN for consideration. And I think the first will be that taking elections by the July 1st deadline, originally proposed by the Muslim cleric Sistani, off the table. Everyone knows that that's not possible. That leaves options of several types. One would be to have the elections later in the year, probably at the end of the year or early next year. That's, in walking around the halls of the UN today, everybody's best guess of what's most likely to emerge from this. That would be coupled with some kind of handover of some of the key functions to perhaps an expanded Iraqi Governing Council or some other process where you have an expanded authority there. The other alternative would be to have some kind of Grand Council, the Afghani process led by the current UN envoy to Iraq when he was in Afghanistan, called the Loya Jirga, where you bring in the country's elders to decide a process and take on more responsibility there. So something of that type of mix of options will be what Lakhdar Brahimi puts on the table. He'll be back-channeling with Washington throughout the week.
And Pat Lang, given what Colin Powell said today and what Paul Bremer said this weekend, does it appear to you that even the Bush administration's conceded that their caucus's idea, which we won't go into, but it was a complicated process they wanted to set up an interim government, is dead?
I think that's absolutely dead. I mean, the Shia clerics don't want it, and the governing council would prefer to retain power in its own hands. And they're going to be given power, evidently, and it's going to be difficult to see whether or not they're going to be willing to give up that power, some sort of electoral process, easily once they've had control of the country for a while.
And Professor Duisha, very, very briefly, can you envision that there is some kind of interim arrangement between the time the U.S. wants to hand over power, July 1, and Brahimi says it's time for elections, or elections are feasible at the end of the year, that everyone would accept? Or do you think the violence will get worse?
I think that in terms of the IGC, the Governing Council, that probably will be expanded. They'll bring in groups that have not been represented so far, maybe increase it to 45 to 50, even 55. Then work for an election date maybe at the end of the year or the beginning of next year. In the meantime, allow political parties to form, to propagate their message, to kind of form a balance, a secular balance, a more professional, more middle class, more urban balance to the clergy and to the tribal leaders who will be elected if without that kind of arrangement.
All right, and I know we'll get back to that once the recommendation's out. Thank you all very much.
Still to come on the NewsHour tonight, immigration reform, a breast cancer development, and a Campaign Times update. Immigration reform from the perspective of the immigrant community itself. Our report is by Ted Robbins of KUAT Tucson.
The spring semester is beginning at Pima Community College in Tucson, and 20-year-old Luis Herrera has the same goal as most good students.
My goal is, to pass those classes and get those A's, straight A's.
Straight A's?
Yeah. I'm paying for my classes. I'm paying for those classes and gotta learn something.
Unlike most other students, though, Luis Herrera carries an extra burden. He is in the U.S. illegally, brought here by his parents 11 years ago when he was 8. They came to the U.S. legally through an official port of entry. They became and remain illegal by staying long after their tourist visas expired. The federal government estimates about half of all illegal immigrants got here the same way. They're called overstays. Tourist visas are no longer given so liberally.
My parents didn't go back, well, personally, because most of our family was already here, and my dad was able to get start working and save up, and I think now we're better off living in the United States. We have a house, my parents are able to pay half of my education, and we're doing good.
Initially, Luis Herrera says his family welcomed President Bush's recent immigration reform proposal, until they realized it was for another temporary visa of 3 to 6 years.
My family and people I know who are in the same situation were really excited about it. But then when it was made more clear that it's just temporary visa, and after 3 years or even 6 years, we're gonna have to go back, or or we're gonna end up in the same situation that we currently are. So I pretty much think that it falls short. There's no really clear path for one to become a U.S. citizen in this country. It's a guest working program, and it's similar to probably the ones they had back in the 40s,
Yolanda Morales' father came from Mexico as a guest worker, or bracero, in the 1950s. She followed illegally in the 1980s. Now she has 2 sons, a house, and a job as a custodian at a Tucson elementary school. She says she supports the president's proposal because it will help people trying and dying in the desert to get here. But she also has reservations.
For the people who are coming now, it's great. It's great. But for the people who are here, are they going to have to leave with their families? All those children who were born here, who were established here, will they have to go back to Mexico?
The fate of families and the temporary nature of a guest worker program are common worries throughout the immigrant community, says Rene Franco. He fled Guatemala as a political refugee during the 1980s. He's now an immigration law counselor for Catholic Community Services. He's spoken with dozens of illegal immigrants in the last few weeks, some of whom say they won't even apply for a guest worker visa.
The majority wants permanent residency. The reality, Ted, is that they had been living here for 5, 10, 15 years and more. I just talked to a man this morning, and he said that he was fearful that the government having information about his family, date of birth, where he came from, where he entered, when did he enter the U.S., if that was not going to be used to deport him at the end of the 3 or 6 years legal status.
Some critics say the president's plan will reward those who broke the law to enter the U.S., but Jose Ecvictorin says they are ignoring how difficult it is to enter legally. Ecvictorin is here legally from Mexico. He is an MD and a PhD who works at the University of Arizona Physiology Department, researching what are called gap junctions, the space between cells which they use to communicate chemically with each other. He has an O1 visa, given to, quote, persons of extraordinary ability. Despite that label, Ecvictorin has to go through a series of difficult visa renewals every few years.
This is the original petition and letter of support, and what I plan to do if there is any grant that I get. These are mentions on my papers and papers that cite my paper.
Ecvictorin says he hopes visa reform will accompany immigration reform, so no immigrant has to go through what he does.
I can tell you, there were days that I was thinking, what's the point? I go to Mexico and I get a job and that's it. Good sales?
Last year, the government granted only 6,000 O visas and 65,000 other specialized work visas. Jose Victorin says he harbors no resentment toward those who might gain legal status without the visa hassles he has had.
Legal or illegal doesn't mean moral, immoral, indecent, or crime. It's legal because there is a law against it. You know, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, if I want to work, pay me something, and that's it.
Historically, anytime changes in the law are proposed, rumors run rampant in the non-English speaking community. This is a monthly forum to educate immigrants and to warn them against immigration fraud. The Texas State Attorney General recently issued a similar warning, which Rene Franco echoes.
To wait until it becomes clear that the Congress and the President has passed a law that allow you to apply to legalize. In the meantime, I think it's to stay away from any person that approaches you saying, give me $500 and I fix your papers with a new immigration law. Nothing needs to be done right now.
Luis Herrera is not likely to fall victim to fraud, only to time. He's not required to prove his legal status at a community college, but to continue his education next year in a university, he'll have to become legal. Herrera wants to become a doctor, a long process. So he favors congressional bills that could lead to permanent residency or citizenship. He says the president's proposal is pure politics.
Personally, I think it's to attract that strong Hispanic vote. The Democrats are doing the same thing, you know. And like I said, if he was really serious about changing immigration policy, he would be, you know, supporting those bills that are currently already in Congress and have a good chance of passing this year.
Yolanda Morales, meanwhile, will get to exercise that Hispanic vote. She gained legal status as a result of the 1986 federal amnesty. For years afterward, she held permanent resident status. Then last year, she realized her dream of becoming a U.S. citizen.
We stayed here, and we went all the way to the end, and we're American citizens now, because we have our rights. We have the same rights as all Americans here in the United States, and that was a goal we set out to achieve, and we achieved it.
For immigrants, the Bush proposal seems to have two contradictory goals. It allows newcomers easier access to the U.S. and jobs. But for those already here, it could mean registering with the government only to be forced back to their native countries or back underground when their permits expire.
Now, a possible connection between antibiotics and breast cancer, and to Jeffrey Brown.
Breast cancer is the second leading cause of cancer deaths among women in the United States and the most common cancer in women worldwide. The use, and according to many experts, overuse of antibiotics is widespread in many countries. A study reported in this week's Journal of the American Medical Association makes a provocative link between the two, but it also raises many caveats and questions. In the studies, researchers reviewed medical information of a group of more than 10,000 women in Washington state. They compared those in the group with breast cancer and those without the disease, and found that women with increased antibiotic use appeared to have a greater risk of breast cancer. To tell us more about this study, we're joined by Dr. Roberta Ness, an epidemiologist at the University of Pittsburgh. She co-authored an editorial that accompanies the new report. Dr. Ness, welcome. I want to get to the caveats in a moment, but first the study itself. Researchers are carefully saying that an association has been established. Can you tell us what that means?
In this case, it means that the women who developed breast cancer were more likely to be long-term chronic users of antibiotics.
Now, they looked at a group of 10,000 women looking backwards at their records. Explain how they did that, please.
Right. Well, this study was done in a health maintenance organization, and they had long-term pharmacy records. So in many cases, they had as much as 17 years of previous records of medication use. And they could compare amongst the women who developed breast cancer versus the women who did not develop breast cancer, those pharmacy records.
Researchers said that it did not matter what type of antibiotic was used and what it was prescribed for. Is that correct?
That is correct. They looked at a whole series of different classes of antibiotics, ones that women are very familiar with, such as penicillins, tetracycline, sulfa drugs, and independent of the type of antibiotic that was used, there was about a twofold excess risk of breast cancer. Furthermore, they looked at a series of infectious diseases that would have warranted long-term antibiotic use, such as chronic skin conditions, acne, for instance, and chronic lung conditions. And in all of those cases, again, there was about a twofold excess risk of breast cancer.
Now, they also tried very hard to rule out other potential risk factors as well.
Yes, they did, and after they had adjusted for a variety of risk factors that are known to increase the risk or decrease the risk of breast cancer, they still found this association.
So if a real link is proven, what would be the significance of that?
Well, I guess it would be quite substantial if it's real. Probably the important thing to say is that we know that antibiotics are a double-edged sword. The appropriate use of antibiotics can certainly be life-saving. So use of antibiotics for bacterial infections is life-saving in many cases. But the overuse of antibiotics, we know, can cause harm. There's a very well-known association between the overuse of antibiotics and the development of resistant bacteria. There's some bacteria now that are in hospitals that are resistant to every antibiotic known to man. That's terribly worrisome. So certainly, at least what this means is that women should be cautious about the use of antibiotics for conditions in which they're not warranted, such as viral infections.
Well, let's go look at the study and look at some of the caveats that were raised, chiefly the lack of a causal link between the two. Explain that for us.
That's right. Well, there's a difference between finding an association and saying that something causes another thing. Scientists require a great deal of evidence before they can say that something is causal. So, for instance, one of the very important things is that there be a consistent literature. At this point, this is really the first large study to show this association. Certainly there will need to be a large body of evidence, so many more studies conducted in a variety of ways which all show this same association. So that's one thing. A second thing is that we need to make sure that there's what we call a temporal relationship between the antibiotic use and the development of breast cancer. Because of the way the study was conducted, which is to say that it was a retrospective study, it was a study where they asked women or they looked back in time for the use of antibiotics. They can't be absolutely sure that the antibiotics preceded the breast cancer. And then finally, we require that there be a reasonable biologic mechanism, and that's something that's in question in this study.
You also raised in your editorial the possibility that that the cancer risk comes not from the antibiotics, but from the underlying things that the antibiotics are intended to deal with, infections, for example, or inflammation.
That's right. The authors suggested that the biologic mechanism might be that the antibiotics were interfering with the normal bacteria or flora that resides in the gut. And that bacteria is necessary for the absorption of the good nutrients and such that may actually prevent breast cancer. But we thought that that was somewhat less likely because all different classes of antibiotics had the same impact on breast cancer risk. And these different classes of antibiotics have very different effects on gut flora, and furthermore, they act by very different mechanisms. So it's rather odd that all of them have exactly the same effect. What we thought was perhaps a more likely explanation was that the antibiotics themselves are not what's the problem here, but in fact they're marking the reason why women take antibiotics, and that is for infection. Chronic infection causes chronic inflammation, and we know that inflammation causes a series of different cancers. There's a well-known link between chronic inflammation and liver cancer, gastric cancer, colon cancer, and in fact it's been shown that nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory medicines, such as aspirin, can reduce the risk of breast cancer. So it's been suggested that for breast cancer as well, chronic inflammation may play a role.
So no one is saying now that women should stop taking antibiotics. What should they do?
I think that they should view this with caution but interest. I think this is a great story to follow, but I certainly don't think that anyone should have a major change in their lifestyle as a result of this first finding.
Okay, Dr. Roberta Ness, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And finally tonight, a Campaign Times look at today's Wisconsin primary and beyond. Polls closed at the top of the hour, and in a major surprise, it's still too close to call. John Kerry had been expected to win easily, but John Edwards is running very strong. With 17% of the precincts reporting, both Kerry and Edwards have 38% of the vote. Howard Dean has 18%. Earlier tonight, before any results were known, I talked with Chief New York Times political correspondent Adam Nagarni. Adam, welcome.
Thank you. How are you?
Just fine. What is the situation on Howard Dean based on your reporting about, let's say he does poorly tonight, as expected. What can we expect him to do?
I'm gonna not try to guess what he would do, just because I guess because of what he's been doing over the past couple of weeks. It's hard to predict. But let me answer you this way. I think that there is going to be, in fact, there already is a lot of pressure from his own advisors to get out of the race. That the fact of the matter is, at a certain point, a lot of voters have voted on this race. A lot of people have seen him, and they've decided to vote against him. It's not like, we were having this discussion pre-January when all the media was like, oh, he's up and he's down and she's up and she's down. None of that's really real. Well, this is real. And if Howard Dean loses here in Wisconsin, that means he will have lost 17 states. And I'll point out to you, he will have lost in a state that he said, I believe a week and a half ago, that he intended to win. So at a certain point, it almost doesn't matter what Dean does. The reality is that he'll effectively be out of the race. A lot of Democrats will consider him out of the race, and his own advisors will be asking him to get out of the race. Now, whether that means he actually resigns, quits the race, keeps running, runs a guerrilla campaign the way Jerry Brown did in 1992, far be it for me to try to guess. But the reality is I think that he'll be gone.
Define a guerrilla campaign.
A guerrilla campaign would be sort of hanging on, showing up at whatever events there are, forums, debates, doing, renegade news conferences, in the hopes that something goes wrong with John Kerry, and that the party has whatever the opposite is of buyer's remorse for Howard Dean, I guess seller's remorse, and wants to take him back. The problem with that strategy is that if something does go wrong with John Kerry, which of course is hardly impossible in this kind of environment, I think John Edwards is much better positioned to be the alternative. So Howard Dean's in a very difficult position. His original campaign manager, I shouldn't say his original, 2 campaign managers ago, Joe Trippi, worked for Jerry Brown in, I believe, 92, and sort of had this idea early on, and I believe told Governor Dean to think about this, to sort of hang on in the event that things don't work out with Kerry in the end. So whether or not he wants to try that. But again, it's hard to do that if you keep losing and losing and losing by the margins that he's losing. And people here, people in Iowa, people in New Hampshire, people in South Carolina, they knew him. He campaigned there. He advertised there. They saw him on television. It's not as if they're rejecting someone based on they don't know. Now, John Edwards might argue, and I'll let him do it if he wants to on your show, that he's in a different situation, that he's sort of a victim of the momentum of John Kerry, and people haven't had a chance to hear him, whatever. But I think that in the case of Howard Dean, that's a harder argument to make.
Is there no question that John Edwards is going to stay no matter what happens tonight?
I guess I've learned in politics never to say no question.
I know.
But I will tell you that he has specifically said that regardless of the outcome, he is going to stay. The only thing that gives me any hesitation, which if he were to say come in third place and a poor third place, and I don't want to tell you there's no reason to think that's going to happen, but if that were to happen, it might be harder for him to get the kind of attention that he wants. But all along, he has wanted this to be a 2-person race between him and John Kerry. He wants it to be during the 2 weeks leading up between today and what we call Super Tuesday, which is March 2nd or 3rd, when there's 10 states voting.
March 2nd, yeah.
2nd, thanks. Yeah, I have calendars for that.
Right.
But that's what he wants. So he'll take, I think, any kind of second place showing as sort of justification to stay in. Now, again, I'll point out, this is welcome to American politics here. Edwards has won one state. The state is the state where he was born. I think he's come in fourth 7 times, second 5 times. I mean, he really has not had a great year, to be honest, but it makes sense for him, I guess, politically to put himself in a position to be someone else but Kerry in the event there is some sort of second, mass reconsideration on the part of Democratic voters about who they want to run against Bush, which is certainly possible.
Sure. Meanwhile, assuming that the results are a certain way tonight and Kerry really does well, back to Kerry for a moment, is it fair to, based on your reporting, that he's going to continue to ignore whoever's left on the Democratic side and run right after George W. Bush?
Yeah, absolutely. For a lot of reasons. It's not in his interest to focus on the other Democrats, and so far the campaign that John Edwards has been running does not really force him to do that. John Edwards has only made the most tentative attempts to distinguish himself with John Kerry. There's a lot of pressure on these candidates not to go quote-unquote negative. John Kerry has been running against George Bush for a while now, and if you look at what he's saying on the campaign trail, he's barely talking about issues having to do with Democratic primary voters other than what has been, once again, the issue of this year, I can beat George Bush. That's the sort of basic argument that he's making. He will move from here to Ohio tomorrow. Ohio is one of those states that vote on March 2nd/3rd.
Right.
But also importantly, Jim, is also one of the swing states in a general election campaign. So you will see him going there in the pretense, I don't want to suggest anything dishonest, but just there's two things going on here, but in the pretense of the primary that's coming up, but in fact what's going on there is he's beginning to do some work in what will be an important swing state. The calendar works to their advantage in a way because, and that's why I think they actually do want John Edwards to stay in the race. It allows him to keep running this campaign. He keeps having every Tuesday night another one of these big victory nights. Again, Edwards is not really attacking him. The story out of this campaign is mostly these candidates attacking Bush. It's not a bad thing for him. And he gets, in this case, between this, Ohio, Florida, Maryland, there's a lot of swing states in a general election that are coming up in the primary calendar.
All right. Adam, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Again, the other major developments of the day, the government of Haiti called for outside help against a rebellion, and Singular Wireless won the battle to buy AT&T Wireless for nearly $41 billion. Tonight's edition of Nova explores the mystery behind the crash of Swissair Flight 111 off the coast of Nova Scotia in 1998. Check your local listings for the time. We'll see you online and again here tomorrow evening with further coverage and analysis of the Wisconsin primary, among other things. I'm Jim Lara. Thank you and good night.
Major funding for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by...
See it start. See it grow. See it develop. See it questioned. See it considered. See it evolve. Change. Adapt. And finally, see it succeed. Need financing for your idea? At CIT, we see what you see.
And by the Archer Daniels Midland Company and SBC Communications.
This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Purchase video cassettes of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. Call 1-866-678-NEWS.
I am PBS.
on the next innovation. Can science meld metal, humans, and machines?
The difference between daring and recklessness is almost non-existent, so it all depends on whether you get it right or not.
The quest to improve human life pushes the frontiers of technology and risk.
I've had to mortgage my whole life, but I think it's worth it.
And is there a limit to how far we can go? Human Body Shop on innovation.
Join us tonight at 9 here on OPB.
For nearly a century, summer resorts for African Americans provided an oasis for the black upper and middle class. Oak Bluffs on Martha's Vineyard is still here. A place of our own on the next Independent Lens.
Middle of July.